Welcome to the Holistic Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Keisha Blair, wife, mother of 3, author of Holistic Wealth, and founder of the Institute on Holistic Wealth. The show will showcase various experts in the key pillars of holistic wealth. Each week, we deliver the best information on how to become holistically wealthy and live your best life. Today, we have a very, very special guest. Our guest today is Janice Campbell, and Janice is the founder of the Receive Your Life company and the creator of the Receive Your Life system. She's been a coach for the past 27 years and began her career professionally as a CPA and certified financial planner, and then transitioned into spiritual matters after, which we'll get into in the show. But welcome, Janice. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. I just wanted to start the show with just an introduction to our audience of your career journey so far and how you transitioned and how you founded your company and melded these two critical parts of holistic wealth. I'd like to think both the finance and the spiritual aspects are two critical parts of holistic wealth. So I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I became a CPA because I thought, I could always get a job and I could have freedom and I could live wherever I wanted. But then once I actually became certified, I couldn't stand the work. It was so boring. It was just like, it was so hard to just sit there and do the work. And then I started to learn about spirituality and spiritual principles. And I just loved it. I was just like, oh my God, I just want to swim in this. This feels so good. This is so great. So I actually kind of hit a wall and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I hired a coach and then she kind of helped me transition into coaching. So I started off with coaching people strictly with money, budgeting, investing, just the nuts and bolts of money. And then it kind of felt like that really wasn't what was going on with people. I mean, they had so much more going on than what was happening with their money. So then I kind of got into the spiritual, and it's like the purpose and why are we doing what we're doing and how does this connect to the money and our values. And so but then I kind of swung out pretty far with the spiritual. And then I thought, no, this doesn't feel right. It needs to be more grounded. So then eventually I kind of ended up integrating both the practical and the spiritual principles, because I don't think you could really have what I call soul satisfying success unless you have both parts integrated.
And that's so wise. And that's exactly why when my editor was helping me with my book, that's exactly why we came up with the term holistic wealth.
I love that title. I love that title because it's the wholeness. It doesn't really work living compartmentalized.
Absolutely. And that's so true. And I've experienced it even with overcoming tragedy and grief. Yes, you can have, your finances intact and still not feel whole. Like we're all experiencing that now with COVID. It's brought it home more clearly to us. But before that, people were still living very compartmentalized, as you said. And so, Janice, how did you pivot into integrating the two and starting the company? I mean, how did that work with getting clients and getting people to realize that this needs to be integrated? Or was it coming out organically through the work?
It was a slow process, I have to say, because it's kind of that thing about letting go of the safety and security of the financial, the practical. So it took me a while to really completely disentangle myself from the CPA work and the financial planning work, because that felt like security to me. And I remember my first client, I charged him very little, but I was just started talking about purpose and, only purpose. And it felt kind of scary. But then I got comfortable with it over time, because what I really came to understand is we're all the same. We are so similar. We have specific things that are unique to us, unique aspects of our gift, but basically as humans, we're so similar. So then I just started really connecting with that, the humanity part. And even now, most of my work is really about the inner, the consciousness. I don't do the practical part so much anymore. It's really focused on aligning your values, really getting clear on who you are, what are you here to do, who are you here to be, what are you here to share? Because when the consciousness gets lined up, then the physical takes care of itself. I mean, it's still important for people, I believe, to work with people to learn the financial skills that we need on the physical plane. But really, my work is really about leading with the consciousness, making sure that's shored up and aligned with the truth of who you are. And then learning that, then the physical plane. But the physical plane is so much easier once we're aligned with our true self. It's very circular and doesn't really deliver when we lead with the physical, the practical, without our soul.
Yeah. And so I have so many questions. It sounds like what you're talking about is living in divine discontent, and to ask you what that is, to explore that a bit, and what challenges that might pose in terms of our life and living our best life. And you mentioned the physical plane and the spiritual plane. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, the thing about divine discontent, I love, it's actually a very beautiful thing, because it means that your soul wants to live and express more than what it is. So it's like we're frustrated. We're living as our compromised self rather than our true self, which means we're following the shoulds and doing everything we think we should be doing to achieve our goals. But we're feeling something's off. It's that divine discontent. And it's a good thing that we're feeling it. Otherwise, we really wouldn't have an awareness that there's more life that wants to be lived and expressed through us. So a lot of times people are, I'm so depressed. But it's like, that's good. There's something going on there. There's something that wants to be birthed within you that's being thwarted.
You mentioned the security part with your CPA and that kind of work providing a security blanket. And for so many people out there, that's the struggle, is how do I give up the security blanket to get that alignment? So is it possible to walk us through that a bit?
The main thing is I always talk about going slower to go faster, going smaller to go bigger. Because a lot of times if we want to make huge changes in our life, usually it's built on scarcity. Oh, I have to make up for all that lost time. So we're already coming from scarcity. But my work is really about figuring out who you are and living your life from the inside out. So it starts with a really simple exercise called the push-pull exercise. And all it is people have a journal and they start noticing when they feel themselves being pulled, inspired, energized, kind of like how their energy naturally flows, what they're attracted to. And then also noticing those times when you feel constriction, like, oh, I don't want to do this paper. I don't want to make this phone call, where your body just tenses and locks up. And that the purpose of really getting familiar with the push-pulls is you're learning how your energy is naturally designed to flow. You're learning about who you are, because when we feel good, when we're in alignment, when we feel ourselves being called forth, we're actually living our values and we're in integrity with ourselves and we're being the gift that we are. And the gift that we are actually is where our prosperity comes from. It doesn't come from living from our compromised self, although we're conditioned to believe that it does, like we're going to get a payoff. Like once I do all this stuff I hate, eventually it's going to pay off. But really it's learning how to honor who you are, your essence, who you are this lifetime. And then that connects us to our prosperity. So it's a little bit tricky at first because it feels counterintuitive or counter conditioning, because it feels like we're doing something wrong, but we're actually closer than we've ever been to living a prosperous and satisfying life.
That's so amazing, because you're right, that prosperity comes from that. But is it possible to then just deconstruct a bit how the prosperity comes? And is it through manifestation? Is it through just being aligned more with your purpose? And then, the wealth in the physical manifests? I'm just trying to give the audience a sense of what that is like. Basically,
two things we're constantly working with. One is to get really grounded and clear on your value, the gift that you are this lifetime. Like we're so often we have a misunderstanding of our value, and then we think we have to fix it. So it's a combination of aligning with the truth. And then the bulk of the work we do together is really dislodging where we have a misunderstanding of our value. So what happens is a lot of times we'll have a belief of, let's say, I'm lazy, I'm not doing enough, I'm not talented, I'm not creative. And then we start trying to fix what we perceive as broken. And we're on the scarcity track. So it just keeps that feedback loop keeps increasing. So it's a combination of strengthening the truth and dislodging the false. Because if you think of it like a river, we love to give, like it's our nature to give, but we don't want to give just anything. We want to give our true self. So that river wants to flow. And then if you imagine a big log that's blocking the flow of that river, that's where we're living as our compromised self and where we have a misunderstanding of our value. And we keep trying to turn into somebody else. That's when we say, oh, I'm too much this way, or I'm not enough this way, or I talk too much, or I'm too sensitive. So we're trying to fix, and that really keeps fixing what's not broken is what obstructs the flow, is what blocks our prosperity. But yet we live opposite. We're like, oh, as soon as I self-improve, and as soon as I work harder, and as soon as I fix all these flaws inside of me, then I'm going to experience prosperity. But it's not true. And I love, there was a quote in your book that I think really speaks to this, where you said, there's an overwhelming sense of failure and shame that often comes along with living a different life than the one we think we're supposed to have. So we get stuck in those shoulds, like, oh, I should do what this person's doing, or I should be like that. And that's really what blocks our prosperity flow.
You know, it's so funny, Janice. I was actually just thinking about that. Thanks for highlighting that quote. Because as you were speaking, I was thinking about so many people who are told you should get that corporate job, climb the corporate ladder, get the pension at the end of the day, go for the biggest title in your company. And you're so right. You know, it feels misaligned somehow to a lot of people who are not cut out for that, or that's just not their purpose in life. And there's this fundamental tug of war, you know, that goes on within ourselves and our souls. And you're right. We give ourselves these messages that, yeah, if I only work harder, maybe I need to put out more effort. It's not quite working the way I want to, but maybe if I work harder and maybe if I just go in and do something else and try to do something extraordinary, I don't know, it will be different. And you're right. And it always just seems like you're hitting a wall, right? And there's so many people out there hitting the wall.
And that's what really blocks our prosperity flow. And then we turn it on ourselves. Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I work? Why can't I be better? And that's the inner conflict. That's the log jam. Because the truth is, we're not going to be anybody else this lifetime. We're designed to be who we are. And that's why a phrase that I use a lot in this work is, you can always find your gift in your shame. So often we think what we're ashamed of is we think that's what we have to hide. That's what we don't want people to know about us. So what happens is we actually are withholding the gift that we are. And then we wonder, you know, getting back to spiritual principles, the law of giving and receiving, it's like, I'm withholding the gift that I am. And it's like, how come I'm not making more money? I'm working really hard. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Why is it not paying off? Well, because you're not really giving your true self. You're giving your compromised self. And so all what you're getting back is a compromised life. So that's a lot of what ties to the divine discontent, because we want to give that gift. We're designed to give the gift. But when we're taught or conditioned to believe that, you know, people aren't interested or it's not worthy, it's actually our integrity that's protecting people from us that has us withholding the gift, because we learned that this gift has no value or people are not really interested in it. That's why we withhold it. And there's a reason for that. Like if you go back into when we're born into a context, a culture, a community, a conversation, and our spiritual essence is born into that context. So if our values aligns with our families, it's like, oh, great, you're fabulous. But if our values, if our essence does not align with our families, then we get in the, oh, I have to hide this to survive. You know, they want me to be different. I should care about sports. I should be, you know, then that's how we start the compromising pattern, because we're trying to fit in. We're trying to survive. We're trying to do the right thing. And that's when we start getting this belief that there's something wrong with the way that I am. I'm either too much or not enough.
And that's amazing. So true. And so, Janice, I just wanted to ask you in terms of, because you mentioned the family subculture. And of course, it also ties into money as well and money blocks. and kind of repeating the same money mistakes because of that subculture. And I just wanted to ask you about that because of your background and if you've seen that with clients and how you've seen clients work through that.
Mostly what I've noticed is we do money either exactly like our parents or we rebel. But very often we haven't really found our true, authentic relationship with money, a relationship with money that reflects our values. And that's, I think, why a lot of times we have this love-hate relationship with money because we're ashamed. I've noticed when I was working as a CPA, it didn't matter how much money people had. There was so much shame around it. There's like, oh, I should be doing this. I didn't do this right. We live like there's a mysterious money thing out there that everybody knows and we don't know. And it's not, I think money's not that complicated. I mean, money comes in and money goes out. What's really important is getting clear on your values and then making sure that your relationship aligns with your values. Again, that's the only thing that's going to be sustainable and satisfying. But a lot of times we're like, well, I should care about this, or I shouldn't spend money like this, or I should value this. And then we're feeling disconnected from our money. And then it kind of gets sabotaged because we're not really in alignment. We're not like on the same side as our money. We have like the inner conflict that we talked about earlier. We have that inner conflict then going on with money, where it's kind of like good, bad, right, wrong, a lot of judgment, a lot of shame. And whenever we have judgment and shame, we don't have flow.
And so is that why people will keep repeating the same money patterns then and not break out of those patterns?
There's kind of two things going on because I think we have the kind of robotic money patterns where this is the way you do money. Like I say, so we do it like our parents or we rebel, but we're kind of on automatic pilot. And then there's a whole different thing going on when you really have a deep understanding of your values. Then your relationship to money shifts. But I think initially it's very belief driven. We're like robotic. We don't even think we could live outside of our money beliefs. Like it's kind of like, that's just the way life is. You do what you have to do.
That's amazing because one of the things I've been exploring, of course, not only through my book, Holistic Wealth, but also with this personal financial identities framework that I developed that's coming from the book as well, because this pandemic has just highlighted all sorts of issues and highlighted in every way what we need to be doing differently. And so, I came up with this framework and this free quiz, and I'm so eager. I've been so excited to hear your thinking and your thoughts about it, partly because of your background and your experience and your program, and also the spiritual aspect of it. And of course, aligned with everything that we've been talking about so far, where people repeat the same money patterns and it's the same thing. So I just wanted to get your insights on that. So if you could share with us your results and your thoughts, that would be amazing.
My result was the minimalist. And I forget exactly how I got there, but I could just say, I think a couple of things are when you talk about the financial identity, you could tell if a financial identity is your compromised self or your true self with money. Because I think we may have a financial identity that is our compromised self. That's kind of, we have a certain identity, but it came from who we believe we should be based on what we learned in our conditioning. And then I think we have another financial identity that's actually a reflection of our values. And you could tell which financial identity you're living from by the way that it feels. Like if you feel constricted with your money and you feel like it's not really fun, I'm not really having a good time with my money, I'm just so afraid I'm going to make mistakes and I want to stay on the straight and narrow, but it's really tight and constricted. Chances are you're trying really hard to follow the rules that you learned. And if you have an expansive relationship with money, then it's like it's aligned with your values. It's funny because one thing I loved reading in your book that was refreshing to me, I didn't realize I had shame around it, but when I read it, was the whole thing about calculated risk. I have really deep faith. It's one of my values. I've always felt a really strong connection to source. I have a lot of freedom when I make financial decisions. I kind of feel it. And I've always felt kind of ashamed about that. Like, you should be more logical, practical. You shouldn't stretch so much. You shouldn't. Then reading about you saying, it's important to take calculated risk. Then it's like, oh, okay. But we kind of live like that, where you have these rules going on. That's why the shame kind of creeps up on us, because we don't even, like in my family, it was not a risk-taking family, and there was not a lot of faith. There was a lot of fear. So I always felt kind of ashamed, like when I got out of being a CPA, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not going to survive. I'm not following the money rules. And even when I was a financial planner, that rule you keep hearing, you have to have at least 6 months living expenses. I never had 6 months living expenses, especially during the transition. But then it's like, oh, but I shouldn't be following this spiritual path. I should stay as an accountant. So even though it was a push, I was locked up and I really wasn't sharing the gift that I am. I still felt shame when I moved from being a CPA into more of the spiritual and being self-employed. So it's kind of always going on. It's like, that's why I love the push pulls, because it's like a feedback. It shows you. And then when you run into that constriction, you want to say, what push here? What's the shouldn't? What's the rule that I'm following? Why am I being more loyal to that rule than I'm being to my soul? And then because we're breaking a rule, we start to make up stuff about ourselves. I'm irresponsible. I'm flaky, and then we get in the fix it mode and then we're out of the flow.
You brought up so many insightful things that I just love to touch on. Firstly, you mentioned whether, in taking the quiz to figure out your personal financial identity, if you're feeling constrained with the financial identity, are you feeling abundant? Are you feeling that is your true authentic selves? And that's why I hope when people take the quiz that they really answer it, not from outer expectations, what other people expect of them, but from that inner deep soul place where it's just like, yeah, this is me and this is what I am. So Janice, in terms of yours and being a minimalist, is that where you feel not constrained? Is that your true identity? And do you see it playing out in terms of your own money philosophy and even in your coaching practice and building your business as an entrepreneur?
I like minimalist. I'm not extreme, but I like the word simplicity. That really resonates with me. So that when I saw the minimalist, it's like, oh yeah, I love simplicity. I love clarity. I like I think of it as Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, not too much stuff. I have what I want. I have exactly the right. I don't like having overabundance. I don't like having underabundance. And I think that it feels good just to yes, what I have in my life reflects my values. I live a simple life. I mean, like I say, I have 3 kids, and now that they've grown, it's like we just keep downsizing, and it makes me happy. And people say, how could you move again? It's like, I don't know, it makes me happy. It's like, and it's interesting because we've been renting since 2008 and I love it. We just moved to a farmhouse and a vineyard and people are like, where do you go from here? It's like, this feels good to me. And I was talking to a friend the other day and she says, I only can feel free when I own a house. And she always laughs because it's like, I feel free not owning a house right now. I mean, I'm sure someday we will decide exactly where we want to settle. There's no right or wrong way. You have to really be honest with yourself. What are your values? What feels good to you? What feeds your soul? And it doesn't matter what one person on the planet's doing.
I know. Yeah. And that's true. And I love the examples you gave to illustrate very colorful terms about your simplicity and your minimalism. I love it because my late husband was a minimalist. And as you were speaking, it just came back to me. He loved that simple life, that simplicity and that simplicity of life. Didn't want too many things, was okay with what he had. And he was a CPA too, a CPA, and no wonder. Exactly. He was very good with tracking money, very good with spreadsheets and all of that stuff because he was a financial controller. And, it was so amazing coming up with it, Janice, with the whole framework, because I knew exactly what I was coming up with and the types, and hearing you speak about it. I just love it. I mean, all of them resonate with me. I love all of them, I really do. And just to hear you speak about yours and the different insights that you share is just so amazing. And so I know you coach others as well. You have clients, you actually coach people to become coaches.
Like making my transition, it was really hard. And I love spirituality, but it felt so vague. Oh, have faith, trust, surrender. And my practical mind was like, that's not enough for me. I'm still stuck. I'm not having the transformation I want to have. So I really spent a long time creating this system, working closely with people, but it had to work. It had to work for me first. And then I wanted a system where people could transform quickly, not spend years and years in therapy, but really go right to that sweet spot of where do I have a misunderstanding of my value? Where am I trying to fix what's not broken? Who am I this lifetime? and just to be able to get into the flow of living who they are and not having to have their life on hold.
I also interview quite a few entrepreneurs about scaling their business and how they get clients and all of that good stuff. And so just wanted to ask you two, how do you go about getting clients on a continuous basis and, continually growing the business?
I've started and stopped my business over the years, raising my kids. And so now I'm back full time. Everybody's gone, just left last year. I started again, because like I say, I start and stop it, but I always believe in starting right where you are and going smaller to go bigger. Again, to get back into the groove fully is I started teaching at our church and then had a class. And then it just grows because it's a thing where I think when people start receiving their life, they want other people to receive their life. Like they've gotten relief and it's an easy thing to share. So my business always comes from word of mouth. And now I'm going to start doing this is my first podcast. So thank you. I had a radio show for 5 years, but that was many years ago. So this is fun to get back into the podcast. And so that's how I plan on continuing to market. It's just having conversations. My business has always grown by word of mouth from my clients and my students.
That's amazing. And of course, if you're a minimalist too, I suspect that you probably, in terms of your marketing and your client acquisition, that you're probably not too big on spending a lot to, of course, get those clients through the door and a lot on marketing and advertising and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I hardly ever spend money on marketing. I mean, not because I'm trying not to. It's just, I just, again, you lead with the gift, you lead with the essence, and the money follows. But when we get it backwards, sometimes like, oh, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of money at this, but I'm going to withhold myself and I'm not really going to bring myself forward. And yet that's what people resonate. That's the connection. I think the reason why I love minimalism is I feel close to God. So it's like, I don't want a whole bunch of stuff in my way. So it's even like, I go on my daily walks and I do a lot of marketing that way. It's like listening. What's the next inspired step? What's the next inspired step? So trying not to plan too far ahead, but just really feeling that guidance and that intuition and trusting that, really trusting that, like, okay, that's the next thing. I just finished putting together a quote book. It's been on hold for a while. And then all of a sudden it's like now.
That is definitely one of the strengths of the minimalist is that they don't have all these things and distractions around them. So they can get really centered. And as you mentioned, listening to, your intuition and all of that, which is such good stuff. Like I have a whole chapter in Holistic Wealth on intuition, and it's everything, right?
Everything.
Exactly.
I think it's everything. Otherwise, we're running in circles, It's like, and that's when we get in that, I call it the compromising treadmill, our compromising patterns, but we're running around and yet we're not home. We're not listening. So we could do so much activity and spend so much money and still kind of be missing the mark, not really sharing the gift that's going to result in the prosperity. And even if we make a lot of money, a lot of times, I'm so exhausted. So then we start shrinking our business or because we need some freedom and space and room. It's out of balance. We always have to kind of bring ourselves back into balance. So I think the more that we live from that balance, and we could leverage our power.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so true. So true. And so, Janice, where can the audience find you in terms of your website and social media?
receiveyourlife.com. And then every month I offer a free 1-hour introduction class. So people could always sign up for that and come and join us and learn about the system, learn about the philosophy, have plenty of times for questions and answers. And then from there, people go into a 1-month basics course and then a 2-month advanced course. And if they want to become a coach, they go into the coach's training program. And then I also send a weekly inspirational email. So people could go to my website, receiveyourlife.com, and sign up there. And then also my email, janice@receiveyourlife.com, if anyone has any questions or wants information.
Okay, perfect. And Janice, thank you so much for sharing with us on the show today. It was amazing having you. And I'm sure people have some amazing tips and strategies and lots of things to think about after you sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I just want to say, I loved reading your book. I really enjoyed it. I read it last weekend. It was really,
thank you.
And what it brought back to me too, just reminding the whole self-care. There was something so nurturing about it. It just felt so good. Like that whole thing about coming home to ourselves. Just love that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you had a chance to get, the book and read it. And it's so good to hear, feedback too. So thank you so much for sharing that.
One thing too, I just wanted to say about your chapter on spiritual self-renewal really aligns with the receiving your life. Really releasing the should compromise self for the true self. I talk about receiving our life, but spiritual self-renewal is another way to say it. Really coming back into the flow of our life.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And that's one of my favorite chapters. And it's so funny because up to yesterday, I sat down just rehearsing lines from the book in my head. Sometimes that's what I do when I need to bring myself back into this alignment, because there's so many distractions around us, and especially COVID, and I find myself rehearsing different lines in my head, just repeating them like verses. And it's mostly from that chapter too. It's one of my favorite, which is why I was happy to also have you on the show.
Well, I think it's too, like you say, we all have to find our way back into the flow. The thing about receiving your life, which makes it different from other systems, is so personalized to each person because you're working with your push-pulls. So like when you're saying, I love it, I read those quotes, I read that chapter, that feeds me, that brings me back into the flow. Like it's so important for each person to know, like, that's how I feel with my walks. That brings me back into the flow. Like everyone has to know for themselves what's going to bring them back.
I absolutely agree. I love my walks too. I absolutely cherish them because it brings me back. And I don't know, I get the inspiration and I get my next steps, like I feel like I get my marching orders,
Yes, that's how I feel. It's like the world quiets everything down, the water calms down, and then we could hear.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Like I do love that. And there's so much that you said that resonated with me today. And so I'm so grateful. Thank you for joining us this week on Holistic Wealth with Keisha Blair. Make sure to visit our website, KeishaBlair.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you will never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Are you a member of the Institute on Holistic Wealth? If not, what are you waiting for? Go to instituteonholisticwealth.com/memberships to choose your membership plan and join. As a member, you get so many perks. Free worksheets, advice, coaching, and a member's workshop to design an intentionally designed life. You need to figure out your life purpose? Take the Build Your Life Purpose Portfolio online self-paced course. You're struggling with all your money decisions? Take the free financial identities quiz and then take the course. You recently had a breakup, job loss, or experienced the death of a loved one? Take the Holistic Healing course. You need an overall plan to achieve holistic wealth? We will help you figure out your holistic wealth blueprint. And of course, if you want to start making money by helping others achieve holistic wealth, become a certified holistic wealth consultant. Regardless of what career you've got, the Institute will show you how to increase your income and walk in your purpose. The sooner you join, the sooner you start to achieve a more holistically wealthy lifestyle. And you're going to want to stay for a very long time. So go to instituteonholisticwealth.com/memberships to join. If you haven't read the book yet, pick up a copy of the award-winning, best-selling Holistic Wealth 32 Life Lessons to help you find purpose, prosperity, and happiness.